99% of the people in horse racing are losing money. And they follow the pedigree and they follow the cocktail party nonsense.
Are you ready to transform your life? This is a no-nonsense show helping immigrants like you create generational wealth, even while working full-time. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Saket Jain.
Welcome back, my Great to Wealth listeners. Today, we're going to be delving into a very, what I call is non-traditional, even for me, as an investing style. We're going to be talking about how to become a successful breeder and manager of thoroughbred racehorses. With us, we have Jeff Seder on the podcast today. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I don't understand anything about horses, man. So part of that is I'm just going to learn a lot from this conversation as much as my listeners. So we're going to learn as things unfold. So I'm going to ask the questions that I usually ask when I'm trying to learn about a new industry, trying to learn about a new asset class here. So Jeff, give us a little bit of history about how you got into, I think you have a very fascinating story about going on a date with a girl but falling in love with the horses instead of girls. So tell us a little bit more about, give a little bit more color on that story.
Yeah, so I decided I wanted to be with horses and I wanted to be outside, although I was at the time at Harvard Law and Harvard Business Schools, doing them both at the same time before they had a joint program. And I had been, before that, pre-med at Harvard, so I had a good scientific background. I was in the top 1% or so of my class, so I'd taken it seriously. So I was kind of burned out on the whole thing. But I decided I loved horses. So I had to do a thesis on something combining business and law for the combined program. And so it got to be March of my senior year, and I hadn't started the damn thing. And I was out riding horses in the afternoons. Wow. So I had to go into my advisor and to where I was on the thesis. My advisor was Archibald Cox, who was the famous lawyer from the Nixon Midnight Massacre. When he was the special prosecutor, and he got fired and everybody resigned, and Nixon ended up resigning. Yeah. And his office was in the stacks, which was deep in the library where they keep all the books on shelves in the back somewhere in these cavernous spaces, and they have a desk in there. And I sat down and he said, "Well, how's your thesis going?" And I kind of looked at the ground. He got the idea right away I was in trouble. So he said, "Well, what are you interested in?" And I looked at the ground and I said horses. And I thought he was going to throw me out. So he turned around. He took this great big book out from behind the desk and drops it on the desk, and the dust all goes up. And he says, "This is the statute that governs horse racing in Massachusetts." Where Harvard is, of course. He says, "Nobody's ever looked at it. Why don't you do that?" So I did, and I went crazy. And I ended up going in the capital of Massachusetts, in the archives, looking up all the stuff about the racetrack finances and that, and I came up with incredible stuff about how they were funneling money out to the wrong places. I read every book I could read, and I got an A in the damn thing, and it introduced me to horse racing. And I couldn't figure out any other way I could be outside with horses. I was too big to be a jockey. I didn't have any money. I had no connections and knew nothing about racing. But I knew more science, and more. I had learned that horse racing was still 300 years the way they were still doing everything was tradition. It was all eyeball and intuition, and the racetracks were all Damon Runyon novels full of scoundrels and rascals. And it was just, everybody was losing money except somebody who got lucky, like a lottery ticket with a big horse. And I said, I can do better. And especially after I got the opportunity to work early with, just as it was created, with the Olympic Sports Medicine Committee. And I learned all what they were doing for Olympic athletes. So I decided I would do that for horses. But what we learned in the Olympic thing was that elite athletes were as different from normal as injured and sick is from normal. So if you think you know about them and what to do with it, because you know normal or abnormal and sick, you don't. You need to go and collect all that data on what's different about the elite athletes. And a lot is different physiologically, exercise physiology and biomechanics. So neurologically. So I went, and that data didn't exist in horses. The veterinarians at the major institutions and the luminaries in the field all thought they knew, but they didn't, because they hadn't studied it. They didn't have the data. So first thing I did because of interval training was I created a heart rate meter that would be accurate on horses, which was a lot harder than it sounds because they have electrical arrangement under their skin to twitch off flies, and it creates so much noise that it ruins the EKG. And you can't shave horses, especially when it's not your horse and it's some racehorse in the word you're trying to fix the race or some screw around with a horse.
Yeah.
So I had to invent new electrodes. I had to invent a new chip, and this was before there were PCs invented. I had to get a new chip made for me designed in Japan, so we could filter the EKG filter out the noise and get an autocorrelation function to find the QRST block, and we got accurate heart rates. And the first thing we did trying to create this heart meter, we were working with the leading cardiologists in the world on horses. And they told us because the heart was so big on a horse, it wouldn't go as fast as a human heart rate, and it wouldn't go up and down as fast. So we shouldn't expect heart rates on the racehorses more than maybe 130 beats a minute. So our meter kept saying it was up above 200, maybe 250 on some of them.
Wow.
So we kept trying to fix the thing until finally I said, you know what? There's nothing wrong with our meter. You guys don't know
Doctor is wrong. Yeah.
You haven't got the data, and you just assumed that you were wrong. This is it. Not only that, but the resting heart rate of these really good athletes was down around 27 beats a minute. And if you walked into the stall, you didn't see a hair change on that horse, and the heart rate had changed to 120 like that. So these great big horses on these hearts were not only went much faster than human hearts, but they could go up and down. They were more labile. They could switch gears much more rapidly. And that became, and I created the data and I published it. That became a model for everything. It was the stride, the gait of the horses, the paintings of the horses from the 18 and 1700s where they show the horses running. It's all wrong. The biomechanics stuff was wrong about the gait. They didn't even know the gait of these racehorses. They had the transverse gallop and blah, blah, blah. So I did a study. I teamed with the leading biomechanists from the Olympic Committee and from universities, and I filmed it 500 frames per second with video. At that point was over $100,000 for a high-speed video in those days. And I had to frame by frame on 500 pictures per second, take the data out, digitize it. And I found out that the gait on these racehorses was different at full flight than anybody had supposed. And that's what made it so I could predict who was going to get hurt more likely, who was more efficient, who wouldn't get as tired. And so when they were telling me, you're not a vet, you're not an engineer, how the hell do you know? So I published my first paper, basically said, you guys don't even know the basic gait. You didn't know the heart rate. You don't know the basic, you didn't have the data. So, and then it went that way. I did that. I went after, in Australia, there was a guy called Dr. Steele who had said that the hearts of horses, he said that the great horses have bigger hearts. And one of the things, they did an autopsy on Secretariat and his heart was huge. And it turns out that was absolutely meaningless because their hearts keep growing through their life. So all the older horses have huge hearts. But he said that the bred horses had heavier mass hearts. And he could tell it from the EKG, from the distance between two peaks on the EKG. But so he would go into the stall with this little machine, with a piece of paper and a little needle that the paper would move, and then they would measure the distance. I looked at that and I said, that is, first of all, it's not directly measuring what you want to measure. It's an index. Secondly, I have worked in those barns doing a lot of research on a lot of stuff. The voltage goes up and down and on and off. The speed of the motor running your little paper thing is going faster and slower. And so the measurements between the peaks are going to be determined as much by the voltage and fluctuations in your barn as the mass of the heart. So it's a crummy way to do it. So I said, let's do it accurate. Let's use ultrasound. Turns out the only way in those days you could do ultrasound to go in and measure the heart was in a university in this huge machine that cost, $1 million or something. So I took an Apple IIc and I got a programmer in some machine language, and I went to military black box guys in Washington, D.C., and we built a portable ultrasound machine to go in and measure hearts and then take data off the screen instead of from a oscilloscope trying to do it on the fly as the heart was beating, right? So we could stop it and measure shit. So we could measure the thickness of the walls and the chamber and the ejection fraction. And we also found that it wasn't reproducible when you tried to do we followed the protocol for echocardiography from all the major universities, and you couldn't get reproducible results. And they thought it was our equipment. And we said, it's not our equipment, it's your protocol. You don't have the right landmarks in the heart, and you're using switch shifts around. So we went to the other side of the horse. We found landmarks that didn't shift around depending on all kinds of variables. And now the equipment they use and the protocol they use is ours. We never made a dime on it. We should have. We did patent the results, which was 96% of the really good racehorses have hearts that are much bigger and stronger than the average, and they do it when they're yearlings. So we did a study because nobody would believe us. We did a study on 12,000 horses over 10 years, every split of every race they ever ran afterwards, and huge status. And we hired the head of the statistics department at Rutgers University to go over the data. He did FDA clinicals, and when he was all done, he said, "You could get FDA clinical approval with this." You got sick, and we published it. And that was like 20 years ago. To this day, a lot of people still don't use that, or they do it wrong. They do I can give them the violin and the instruction manual, but they can't play a symphony.
Right.
The technicians don't have the database, they don't have the experience. They just don't. So they can't do it right. So anyway, I did all this, and it went on and on and on, and nobody would use us until finally I went to Kentucky, like when I had in my hand after I'd spent millions of dollars. I was earning money other places with my education in leverage buyouts. And I went to one of the leading guys, a leading owner, a leading breeder. And I did all that, made the presentation to him. And he was my first break. And that's a good story, but I'll shut up and let you ask your question.
No, I think this is what I was going to ask you, is that because it seemed like whatever word, I think you already gave the answer, which was in your last statement, because I was going to ask you, what you were doing was not turning into money right away, right? It was
I didn't make. I had, not only did I not have the data, but I didn't have the equipment to get the data. So it was like 20 years of starving to death eating barn burgers, we used to call it.
So let me ask this,
and I had a day job.
What kept you motivated, Jeff?
I had my nickname in the betting world. I work with some of the biggest bettors in the world in professional handicap is Dogzilla, because I'm dogged. I just knew I was right. I refused to quit. I was losing my ass. I had a day job, and I bought my own horse that I wanted to race for racing, and I tried to break him myself, and I fell off and broke my arm. So I had to hire somebody, and that's how I met the person that was one of the turnarounds. I met Patty Miller, and she's one of the first women jockeys in the United States. She was a successful trainer, set new track records at major racetracks.
Yeah.
And so she's been a trainer and jockey and all these other things. And she was 2 years old, bouncing in a basket on the back of her mother's hunter horse. So she was a lifelong traditional horse person, but she was intrigued by what I was doing, and she began to help me. And in the beginning, it was like this, with banging heads, because I was so arrogant. I was sure I was going to do it better, but I had to learn that what I had was going to be a layer on top of the best expertise, not instead of it.
Correct.
And she got me to work with top trainers that she knew personally, including Billy Turner, who had the Triple Crown winner back then, Seattle Slew. And then things really started to click. And since then, I told you, we've had multiple world champions. We've made enormous amounts of money for some of our clients. And in an industry where 99% of the people lose money, it's just a social hobby kind of thing.
So tell me the economics of this horse racing, Jeff, kind of like from... If somebody were to get into it, and when I'm saying about horse racing, we're not talking about just betting on the horse. We're taking it, in this case, buying an asset, which is buying a horse, and then raising it, breeding it, and getting him ready for because I'm assuming that's where the money is.
Yes. The money is when you make a great racehorse and then it retires for breeding. But I want to tell you that, just quick, that story about how I got started, where we actually started to make some money. So I was pretty desperate, and it had been a long time, and I now had the data and technology, and I knew it worked. And I knew statistically it was more powerful than anything they had, than pedigree, than all these great guys who said, the great trainers who went out and said they could see everything about the gate. And I knew that I saw stuff at 500 pictures a second slow motion digitized that they had no idea about, because I saw them paying big money for horses I knew were going to break down, or no way they could go. They could carry their speed the distance of a race. So I knew they didn't know. Anyway, so I went to this guy, and I gave him this he let me tell him all this stuff. And he said, listen, I got 200 horses. I'm already doing pretty good. Make one recommendation. And I said, but I have to explain to you how the whole process works, and it's many variables and blah. No, make one recommendation. So I spent like a week on all the stock. And I came back and I said, take this horse and enter it in a month or so from now in the Belmont Stakes. Now, there's only 100 what they call grade 1 races that are from the regulatory body, the very best, most prestigious, most profitable, biggest purses races, famous races. There's only 100 a year in the whole world. One of them is, 3 of them are the Triple Crown, the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont Stakes. So they're for the very, very top things. This was a horse that had run like 5 times and hadn't won yet. He was a maiden. So he burst out laughing. I said, no, let me explain. So I explained it to him that I had figured out from the Olympic stuff on young swimmers, they were trying to predict who could go a longer distance when they got older. And it turned out that they fatigued at a rate. It was definitely specific to the individual, and it followed a logarithmic velocity decay pattern on a repetitive motion. So you could extrapolate their time and as they tired and see what their time would be at a longer distance. I had done that for his horses, and I had found this horse. You know, it hadn't won anything and been impressive. They were running in short distances, 3/4 of a mile. The Belmont Stake is the longest race pretty much in the United States. And it's double the distance of a lot of the races. The question is, who the hell can go that distance? You know, it doesn't work to win the first half of the race.
Yeah.
So this horse was not fast, but he never slowed down. And when you extrapolated it out, he was world class at 1.5 miles. And so I told him that. So he said, okay, I'll do it. I couldn't believe it. He was that's who he was. He was an entrepreneur himself. He was a risk taker. He believed, actually only because of Patty Miller, because I had Patty with me. And I was working with Billy Turner, who had Seattle Sleuth, so I had a little credibility.
Yeah.
So he tried it. When we got there, his trainer was pissed off. He said, this is ridiculous. I'm only doing it because I was forced. The racing form that day had an analysis of who's in the race, and this one can do that, and that one because of his pedigree, and this one because he did this. And then there's the jokers and the idiots, and they listed our horse. They never apologized. So the horse's name was Nolan's Cat, named after his son. And Catiensis was a new stallion. He was just introducing a new stallion. It was first crop, had this horse, Nolan's Cat. So, and it hadn't won a race. So it was an inauspicious start for nobody was going to breed to a stallion if it hadn't, nothing came out of it.
Yeah.
So we ran Nolan's Cat. So Nolan's Cat comes out of the starting gate and he's trailing the field, and I'm going to hide under the table. I'm thinking, oh shit. And then about halfway through the race, he starts to pick up horses. And then we get about 1/4 mile left and he's flying. And then we get to the stretch and he's heading at the leaders. And by the time they got to the end, he was clearly moving faster than the 2 horses ahead of him. And he would have won if it was another 3 or 4 strides, and he was third. So now Ken Ramsey, bless his heart, he needs a new kidney. By the way, if anybody knows anything about kidney donors, he's type O. Ken Ramsey in Kentucky. Anybody in horse racing knows. Anyway, so now instead of a nothing maiden, what they call a maiden, never won a race, he had a horse that had placed and looked terrific in one of the most famous classic races in the world from his first crop from a stallion he wanted to promote. So he thought, well, that's pretty good. And just to prove it wasn't bullshit, soon after in the Louisiana Super Derby, which I think had $1 million purse, the horse did it again, almost won. So that was it. So then I got steady work with Ramsey. And then it went from there, and we ended up then came a huge opportunity. A new guy from Egypt wanted to get into the race, and he was smart, and he was a risk taker, and he came and talked to us. And by the 3rd year, he was the leading, spending less than almost all his major competitors, a lot less. In fact, they were buying horses $300,000 to $1 million, and we were at average price of $150,000 and down, and we bought some at like $20,000 that did the number, that won the major grade 1 races. So anyway, this Egyptian guy, and he invested $40 million, which sounds like a huge amount of money, but he got back over $100 million. He got back 64 from us before the Triple Crown winner. Before out of that program came American Pharaoh, who was, I don't know what, 50 million, 100 million, who knows what it was huge. Yeah. So, if you want to buy a basketball NBA team or an NFL team, you're going to spend billions. Mm-hmm. You can buy a racing stable for like 20 million. And have a hell of a lot of fun. And if you do it right, you'll make money. And it's a hell of a ride socially too. But I have to caution, 99% of the people in horse racing are losing money. And they follow the pedigree, and they follow the cocktail party nonsense. They go on and on and on about this, why this horse won this race or what happened, blah, blah, blah. And it's mostly scientific, absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
But my personality, I was arrogant, I was abrasive, I wasn't connected. I'm the kind of guy who would hide in the computer room and you have to slip the pizza under the door. So I was totally never went to the parties. Right. So I still haven't penetrated that. And we haven't had all successes. We had one big guy try with us, but he would buy the horses and then he would say, thanks a lot. And he wouldn't listen to us about the management. So he did all kinds of things that we thought were disastrous. And it didn't matter what the horse was. It was the wrong trainer. It was the wrong race. It was the wrong development program. He had pinned again. It was just all bad. So it didn't work out. So then, of course, he fired everybody, including us. And we haven't, that one. So the moral of that story was, no more are we going to work for somebody who just wants to think. They sit in office and whatever it is, they're an expert in their business. But horse racing is very complex. The sport is complex. The science is complex. They want to do it all themselves. Good luck. It doesn't work. Yeah. You need a team of people. And the technology is proven. It's not theory. We published in refereed journals where they didn't believe anything because we didn't have the credentials as vets or engineers. We had to get it through refereed journals with luminaries. So we hired the best academics to design and execute and interpret the studies. And our studies were not like their studies, 40 ponies in a lab on a treadmill. There were 10,000 horses in the major racetracks over a decade. We really did the homework. So a lot of these people, honest to God, they don't know the difference between the newsletter of some blowhard and a refereed paper of 10,000 horses over 10,000, 10 years. They just don't understand. And they're not going to listen because I'm not in their social circle.
I think there's so much.
I'm not in the jockey club,
Right.
So
there's so much to unpack, Jeff. Let's start. Thank you again for sharing the story. I appreciate that. I see the story. There's a lot of I could have done differently if I was in the right circles versus I'm not going to give up. Right? There's a conflict. That's happening, which is amazing, and I love that. But instead of going that route, I just want to help people understand the economics of the racing game. Right?
Okay.
Money. When is the money made? The money is made when you decide to buy a horse, or when you're betting on a horse.
It's you can betting right away, then money's made. And we generally include some wagering in the whole thing because we're connected to guys who really know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like Michael Kipnis is the wizard. He's in the racing forum. He's started one of these, the most scientific and quantitative approaches. His website's wizardracingsports.com.
Okay.
Anyway, no, the money is made for breeding. Selling the horse for breeding. So the name of the game is to make a successful horse and sell it for breeding. They are now breeding as many as 200, 250 horses to a major stallion. And they'll shuttle him to this 6 months here, and they'll shuttle him to the south and southern hemisphere for another 6 months. So if you can top mare, you got 200 more chances to make a top mare than a top stallion. So the first economics are buy a filly because you can make a multi-million-dollar filly a hell of a lot easier than a multi-million. Although we did it with American Pharaoh, and that's the lottery ticket. That's the massive payout. But we did that by buying his mom for $200,000, Little Princess Emma, and she got her after her second race. But we knew we had, 1 in a million physical specimen and bred her right, and bingo, we got American Pharaoh. Anyway, so no, it's a 3 to 5 year process if you do it right. But about 1 in 6 or 7 are going to be worthwhile. So you cannot do what a lot of people do, which is try to buy the game. They go to the auctions and they pay $1 million for this one, $600,000 for that one, because they were the fastest, the best looking horse. Fortunately for us, most of them don't do the heart. We do DNA markers now for the things we know. They don't do any of that. So fortunately, we're still able to buy at the averages, 150 or below. And we have bought champions for 20,000, 10,000. But so we're buying the horses. Yeah. So the rule is buy the horses at moderate prices. You can do that if you have the knowledge, right? Your chances will be identical to the guys buying the $1 million horses. In fact, probably better. And so you start out by buying right. And then 3 to 5 years later, these horses, you're going to buy horses that can go a distance of ground. You don't want to buy the ones that win right away when they're a baby and then they get hurt. I mean, it's just not as reliable a way of going about it. And anyway, and it's not as, they're not end up worth as much money anyway. So we buy the horses, they aren't terrific in their first, when they're babies, but they mature into serious athletes. Then you sell them as brood mares or as stallions. And that's where the money is. And rather than a theory, we have done this. Our track record, verifiable, is on our website. You can call the people on the horses. You can look it up on their places. It's all verifiable. You know, all the horses that they were, what we paid for them, the whole thing. So how much does a racehorse cost? It costs about $4,000 to $5,000 a month to keep it in racing. The horses that we buy typically cost anywhere from $40,000 to $250,000. And they're all about, it's harder to find the $40,000 ones, of course, than it is the 250s. And a lot of horses we find, if they pass all our tests, they've also passed all the traditional tests. So if a horse passes all the traditional tests, other people will be on it. Most, more than half of them won't pass all our tests, but some of them have. So when the guys go out and they buy that $1 million top of the sale, they may get a very good horse, or they may not, right? But we'll let them go. We're not interested in who we didn't get.
Yeah.
Make sure that what we do get can compete with them. And so
if I do a quick back of the napkin math here, you bought a horse for 40 to 250K. Let's at the end of at the max 250K. You're doing 4,000, 5,000 per month, 3 to 5 years. We're looking at somewhere between the investment of about 5 to 600K. Is that math make sense before you're ready to sell it?
No, I don't think it's that bad. I mean, because let's suppose you buy them as a 2-year-old, about a year and a half later, it's really only 18 months, you're going to know what you have.
Got it.
So if you bought a horse for 100,000 and you spend 40 times you spend 60 on the thing, you're 160 in and maybe 200 in before you know what you got. And then if it's a good one, it's worth a lot more than that. But you're gonna, the other problem is, you're not going to make it with most of them. If you make it with half of them, you're doing real well. So you don't really want to invest in one. So yeah, it's not. If you want to have fun, have a lottery ticket. It's like having a yacht with a lottery ticket in the hull.
Yeah,
it'll cost you something to keep it in the slip. It costs you something to use it. It costs you a lot less if you know what you're doing. And there's a lottery ticket in the hull. If you don't want that model, then you got to buy like 10 horses.
Got it.
Or 20. And then the odds work for you because we know what we can do with there. There are intangibles. There are no free. One of the problems is there's big finagle factor is injuries. And another one is there's no free agents. Nobody asked the horse if they want to do it. When I was younger and I exercised racehorses, and in the steeplechase country, we would go out in the morning in groups of 5 or 6, what they call a set. And you would exercise the horses together. And some horses, it was worth your life to keep them with the other horses. They'd had to be in front. They were trying to go faster. And like Secretary, you'd have to ask him.
Yeah.
And other horses, honest to God, it was worth your life to get them to keep up. They just didn't give a damn. And this wasn't about talent. 40 years ago, I was at Hialeah in Miami when it was a premier racetrack. Maybe it's 50 years. And in a normal race, by the end of the race, the horses would be stretched out from where the finish line is all the way like a half a mile at the end of a long race. And a collie got out onto the racetrack at the turn, a dog, and started chasing the horses up the stretch. And they all got together in this tiny bunch at the finish line. You could have thrown a blanket over all 10 horses in the whole race with the collie right behind them. And I never forgot that. I said, that's what happens when they're all trying. So, you got to, and so some of the best horses we bought, we went to one farm and they were all yearlings. There were like 50 yearlings in the field. It was a big famous breeding farm. We were going over the stock for our client. And they're coming in for feeding time to the gate. And all of a sudden, they part, the Red Sea parts, and through comes this filly.
Nice.
Dominant animal. if she passes the other test, man, we have to. And we did. And she became a champion. Her name was Madcap Escapade. And until she got hurt, she just beat everybody. She was something, Madcap Escapade. I think the guy's name was Bruce Lunsford. A terrific guy in the sport. There was another horse. We went out in the field to buy these. Look at these yearlings. And there's like 10 or 15 yearlings out in the field. And they all have short tails, which meant they were all pulling biting each other's tails off playing. One had a long tail. Nobody messed with it. We bought him, named him Club Fighter, and that's who he was. He was Club Fighter.
Club Fighter.
There's another horse I bought named Pinky Pizwansky. I named him after the jockey, the exercise jockey, a famous jockey for a Hall of Fame trainer, Hal Jones, who rode some of the greatest horses in history, Citation and other Triple Crown winners in the 40s. And in the 1940s, he was gay, and everybody knew it, so they had to protect him. And he was kind of hidden by everybody. So I thought he deserved some recognition. So I named this. I found this horse. He met all the criteria. And when I went to see him at the auction, the last test was spiritual. I wanted to stand right in front of him and see like what I got, which sounds unscientific, and it is. And I'm standing there with my eyes closed. And what I got was, "What are you looking at?" And that's it. And that's who he was, Pinky Pizwansky. He earned out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. He ran a tick-off Kelso's 20-year record for that down in Maryland on the turf. He was kind of a bad luck horse. He lost, right? If you added up all the distance he lost, all the distance he lost together, it was, like this much for $1 million of races. He was always right there.
Wow.
And we paid $30,000 for him. And Billy Turner, bless his heart, who trained Seattle Slough Train, got the most out of it. And I loved that horse. I loved his attitude. And he would go in the paddock, calm as can be, and looking around before the race. And basically, I was thinking, I think sometimes the horse was decide in the gate who's going to win the race. But with the communicating dot. But with him, it was a useless exercise. You had to beat him. You're not going to, if you were the $1 million horse with a $1 zillion pedigree for shake was untight. It didn't matter. He didn't give a damn. You have to beat me. I love that horse.
Jeff, who is
Oh, by the way, this year's Kentucky Derby winner, $40,000 they bought. And the horse right behind him was like 2.3 million.
$40,000?
Yeah, 40,000. Yeah.
Jeff, which brings me to the next.
All the traditional experts who know everything, they don't know everything.
They don't. Yeah. So, Jeff, let me ask a few questions. One is, after all the scientific research you've done, does luck still have a role to play?
Yes. Yes. As the Ecclesiastes, there's the battle not always to the strong nor the race to the swift, but time and chance happeneth in all things. I'm sorry for that phone ring.
That's okay.
Yeah, it does. I mean, bad things happen. We had horses in the Kentucky Derby when they got slammed against the rail and got a new racing stripe, and the other horses pushed them against the rail. Never really ran well again, didn't we? We've had where the jockey screws up and he runs right up behind some other horse, and then he has to stop the horse, and it happens twice in traffic. You're done, because they weigh 1,000 pounds, and they have to go 40 miles an hour or more. And, to have to accelerate from 0 to 40, 1,000-pound inertial mass, a couple of extra times, you're screwed. You're screwed. Or they get banged and they take a wrong step and they get hurt. Or, there's some racetracks they have flaws in them. They used to have potholes. Now they've got ground penetrating rails, and they get rid of most of it. I mean, there's bad spots. There's wet spots where it drains better, and spots where it's dry, and paths where it's hard.
Yeah.
And they don't know, or else they do stupid things like the horses have phenomenal speed. So it'll be a mile race, and they'll go, blistering fast the first half mile, use up the whole horse. Yeah. It's stupid, but they do it. They didn't know how fast they're going. Why didn't they know how fast they're going if they're professionals? Because the horse we give them is very much more efficient, very much smoother than anything they're used to. So they don't know how fast he's going. They don't realize that he's going 44, 21, 44 is for those who know what those times are. And so they use him up too early and they lose the race. They win the first half of the race and you think, you dumbass. Or they do the opposite. The pace is really slow. And we told them, no, don't lay up a fast pace. So they don't know the pace that well. So the pace is slow. So they're 20 lengths, 15 lengths back on a slow pace. So the guys in front are tired. So then they got to make up 15 lengths in the last 5 seconds. They can't do it.
Yeah.
And it happens with good jockeys and good horses. So there's stuff that goes wrong.
Yeah.
And it's just, or there's just like with Kentucky Derby one year was one in the mud by Calvin Burrell. He snuck up the rail with a 50-to-1 shot. He basically ran a whole lot less distance than anybody else in the race had to run because he ran right on the rail. And the whole open for him. You know, in the Kentucky Derby, there's 20 horses. Besides, in the mud, you can be completely covered in mud. They have the jockeys wear 6 sets of goggles so they can keep taking them off as they get covered with mud. And the horse has to get that in his face and in his eyes, coming, and then right whenever he needed it, the hole opened up on the rail at the last second and threw his shot. He won the race. He won. He wasn't an awful horse. He'd been the Canadian champion, but he was still. I mean, so if that was Calvin Burrell and Lady Luck, he knew what to do, and Lady Luck let him. So yeah, there's the ecclesiastics is still calling the shots there. Yeah. But then, you know, if you got a stable, if you have a team, not one horse, you know, you get screwed here and there, but you'll also, you know, the right stuff will prove.
Yeah. Who is this investing good for? Do you have to have loads of money? Are there syndication models that work for this? How are you seeing this investing in the horse business evolve?
Well, the guy who was the perfect was the Egyptian guy, Ahmed Zayat. He had other problems. He ended up with a bankruptcy from other businesses, but it wasn't our fault. And he bought horses with other people that didn't work out, but that wasn't our fault. But he was passionate. He had the money. And it was a profitable venture because it was done right. Everything was done right. He's smart. So I think a high net worth individual that wants to own a sports team, if you're the kind of guy who wants to own the Mets or the Green Bay Packers, you'd have to pay billions of dollars. Here you can play the same kind of game for a fraction of that. And you get all the same stuff. And I think it's with the right people, you're even more likely to get your money back and then some. And so that's who I think we're after. But, you know, it's a certain kind of guy. You probably want to be able to participate. You're probably a guy who knows something about sports, likes sports, knows something about racing, but is smart enough not to, you know, to think you can manage the whole thing by yourself without your team.
Yeah.
And that was Ahmed Zayat. You know, it's like in any, I don't care if it's a doctor or a lawyer or whatever the hell it is, you know, a jockey. There aren't that many people who are extraordinary in their fields. You know, and I was a pain in the ass and arrogant. But, you know, I had an IQ off the wazoo and 3 degrees from Harvard. I was in the top 1% of my class. You know, and Ahmed was a perfect fit for me. He really was. You know, and we didn't always get along. But I respected him. And so, yeah, somebody that's smart, likes sports, wants to play the game. They've got the money, so it's not like it's going to make them or break them. But neither is it a bad investment if it's done right. It's terrible if it's done the average way.
Right. And how much money do you need to get into the sport?
Well, like I say, you can get a horse for $2,000. You can get a trainer for $3,000 a month. And good luck. And maybe you'll do okay. People at California Chroma on the Kentucky Derby, they bought his dam for $8,000. And after that, they heard somebody over saying, you know, dumbass, only a dumbass would buy that horse. So they named their stable Dumbass Partners, DAP. The DAP said, and the first full won the Kentucky Derby. But I wouldn't recommend that as a business strategy. I think if you want to do this, you know, and you're not in it, if you're willing to lose all the money, you can do it any way you want. If you want to lose, you want to just tie up money and not lose a lot of money, then you should buy 3 or 4 horses. If you want it as a business, you should probably buy 20 horses.
Okay,
so you should be in a $5 to $20 million range of investment, and you know, along the way you'll learn a lot, so you'll decide, I want to go heavier, I don't. I don't. And some people, they have to own a farm, so they immediately go out and they buy some ridiculous price farm in Kentucky for a bazillion acres.
Of course.
That they don't need. And because that expertise already exists, you can participate with it without having to invest in it.
Got it.
You know, there's a lot of ways to save money. I mean, plus, we went over all the vet bills for our major clients. They were paying a fraction of what a lot of these guys were paying just for the daily medicine stuff, just for their mail-ox or something. So, and plus injuries. Our horses have much fewer injuries. Why? Because we pick horses that are less likely to get injured, and we know how to manage them better from 40 years experience with some of the best in the business. It's just, it's experience at 10,000 hours from Gladwell. We got it.
Yeah.
So I think that's it, depending on who you are and what you want. But I really want to find guys like Ahmed Zayed, smart. They've got, the money won't hurt them, but they would like to make money, and we can do it.
Right.
And they want to own a professional sports team, and they can afford it.
Correct.
I realize that's pretty rare, but what can I say?
There are people. There are people in my network who want to own a sports team. At least they want to. So I think that makes sense. Jeff, if somebody wants to learn more about the work you do and maybe have a conversation about engaging you in stuff that you do, where can they find you?
You can find me at eqb.fyi, not .com, .fyi, eqb.fyi. And Ken Ramsey's 90 now. Was our big guy, and he's retiring from racing. And he needs a new kidney. I said that. Everybody can help him. Yeah. And it's typo. And so we're about to lose our big guy. So somebody wants to take his place.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. And hopefully those who are listening, if you know somebody with a kidney donor, do contact Jeff for that as well. Appreciate you, Jeff, saying that on the podcast. Jeff, good. And is there, as a parting comment, is there anything that we didn't cover that you believe the audience will benefit from listening from?
Well, a racehorse one animal can take 1,000 people for a ride at the same time. Being on the farm, being with the baby horses, being around the horses, it's fun. It's spiritually uplifting and nothing to do with business. So a lot of people are addicted to it. They find their life in it. And if you haven't tried it, you might give it a shot. There it is. It's
great. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
No, thank you. Appreciate it. It's kind of funny you say that because my daughters who are 8 and 10, they're going to be going to their first horse camp. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, they're going to love it. There's something about kids and ponies, and it's, whether it goes anywhere later in life, doesn't matter. They'll remember that, and they will learn great lessons. Great lessons.
I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, yeah, you should. And go there, maybe visit them, and you'll see just how wonderful it is for them.
Definitely. Well, Jeff, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot about the horsing business that I didn't think I would have ever learned, or I wanted to learn, but now I'm more intrigued about this business. So thank you about piquing my interest. I'm going to look into it, and also I will look at your website as well in more detail.
Visit a farm sometime. Maybe if you're in Lexington, Kentucky, take the horse tour. Visit a farm. In Pennsylvania, visit my farm. You're welcome anytime.
I would love that. Well, thank you again, Jeff. And for the listeners, if you have any interest in learning more about the horsing business, about the horse racing business in general, please reach out to Jeff on eqb.fyi. We'll make sure the website link is included in the show below. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. I really do.
If you got value from this episode, you might consider sharing this content with a friend. But most importantly, be sure to take action on what you've learned. One way you can take the next step is to connect directly with Socket on an investor call. That link is waiting for you in the show notes below.